What's going on, y'all? And welcome to the 40th episode of the Warcry podcast. I'm your host, Yahola Tiger. And on this episode, I haven't really been talking about a lot of sports. And if you don't like sports, hang on. If you're like, nah, I ain't really trying to hear this, bear with me. We're going to talk about sports conspiracies on this episode. Excuse me. One thing about sports conspiracies, and this is not going to be a very long episode, but one thing about sports conspiracies is that we really don't know. We really don't know because the outcomes of games are very, could go either way on some occasions. But before we get to it, so over the course of the last couple weeks, I've put out interviews with Dono from Res Scares, appreciate him, and then Matt Knapp from Bigfoot Crossroads, and I appreciate him, fellow Okie. I had the honor and the privilege to go on Bigfoot Society. This is this past week. I think it dropped Tuesday. I thought that was a pretty fun episode, pretty fun interview. There's a lot of times with some interviews that I've done, it's more of the host talking. No, I can't. No, it's not for. And I've done Matt's, and his is not like that. But I've been on some, different live streams and things like that, where I was like, man, it's like, oh, this is like not even really me talking. Like I'm just kind of here. And I like to talk. But anyways, that's probably an ego thing, I guess. But one thing that I thought was very interesting is the Bigfoot community as a whole. It is very strange to me how people have gravitated to this subject and has, I don't know how to put this, but kind of made themselves into almost like a fanatical group. It's very strange to me. It's very I look in from the outside like I'm just a guy who likes Bigfoot, but I don't talk about Bigfoot all the time. And people are so thirsty and so frothing at the mouth for Bigfoot information that it's almost comical. And I'm not trying to trash on the Bigfoot community. And I know there's some people from, Bigfoot Crossroads and Bigfoot Society who are listening to this. I'm not talking about you guys. Talking about these people that come on the internet and they just be wilding. They just be going crazy. Or they I don't understand. Another thing I don't really quite understand is this social media Facebook group thing. But I've got a little taste of that this week. It was very interesting. Some people are, coming over here and being like, oh, you're not a Bigfoot podcast? It's like, no. I talk about everything. And I think that's what makes my podcast a little bit different. And if you've been with me for this entire ride, you've seen that we go from true crime, we go to conspiracies, we talk about some native stuff, we talk about Bigfoot, Dogman, all that stuff. Well, I like to hit every gamut and every aspect of kind of what really spooky things are, I guess. But it was just very interesting, and that was kind of a little observation that I have for that, because I just was like, man, you guys are really going hard for what? I mean, in the interview that I with Jeremiah, I just was like, we really don't know, and we're never probably ever going to see, and we're never going to I don't think we're ever going to be able to capture Bigfoot. Honestly, I'm be 1,000% honest. I don't think that that's a possibility at this time. And one thing that I thought was very, it's just like I said. I think people get close to it and then they want more, and it's like an addiction. And one thing that if you come over here and you're hearing this from one of those other shows, Bigfoot is one of my favorite topics to talk about. But it's like beating a dead horse. And it's like, hey, there's only so many different encounters, but I just don't know how you guys keep, I don't know how to say it. you guys just keep going. You guys are like, and kudos to y'all, but it ain't me. I'll be like talking about something like, I'm like mid conversation, like, all right, man, it's kind of, I'm not really feeling this anymore. Like, and that's just in my daily life. I'm like, man, we're hitting some minutia at this point. But yeah, like I said, I appreciate everybody that's had me on their show. And, I've had some other people reach out to me about coming on their show, and we'll see what happens. I like to do my own thing. I'm kind of a lone wolf in that aspect, and kind of, how I operate in my life and how I do things. I'm kind of, picky about certain things, and I don't want to go on shows where people got beef and drama. I just ain't my style. But like I said, it's been a very interesting last couple weeks. I guess last few days, just kind of seeing the different opinions and things like that. It's very intriguing to me to see that, and I appreciate them having me on, and I appreciate Bigfoot Society, Jeremiah having me on. That was a lot of fun, man. I told a story that I hadn't really talked about very much, and I think I might have mentioned it once or twice. I might have mentioned it like briefly on a live stream, but I had seen a hyena this past week, like a in-person hyena. Like I was basically, between me and a fence, there was a hyena, and this is out in kind of Metro West Oklahoma City. And it wasn't it wasn't like out in a field. I'm gonna say that it was at one of these like little zoological parks or whatever. But they had a full grown female hyena, and I looked at that thing and I'm like, man, that thing is big. It's bigger than like I thought. Because we look at on TV, and like the lions are just like way bigger, and we kind of assume, oh, these hyenas are like little scrawny things. Like, no, this thing was a tank. This thing was a beast. And there was a story that that I had kind of come in a weird way about finding out about. And it was about these two girls that I picked up when I was Ubering. This is 5 years ago, maybe more. But I was picking them up in Bigsby. And there's kind of this little road that goes, like you're going south into Bigsby proper, like you're going right into downtown or Main Street. And it's Memorial, south of Memorial, if you guys know that road in Tulsa, if you're a person in Tulsa. But there's a road that you take a ride on when you're going south, and then you kind of loop back, and then you go back into a bunch of nice, really, really nice houses. And as you keep going, it gets kind of more like wilderness. And I picked these two girls up at the end of this road, and they were like, "Hey, we're going here." Excuse me, guys. We're going here, and I kind of looked at it, and I said, oh, okay, that's not too far. So I went ahead and, we went ahead and was making our way, and I had the music on, and the girls were like, hey, what was that? Talking to each other. Hey, what was that? And the other girl's like, man, I don't know. That was weird. That was so strange. And she was basically saying that it looked like a dog, but it wasn't. It was bigger than a dog, but it wasn't as big as the car. And I can't remember how they described it, but essentially this thing was watching them next to one of their vehicles. And when the way that I remember that they described it, that it was like it had like a weird body, and it wasn't like a normal looking dog. Dogs kind of have a straight back, and then obviously the tail and the legs, and it's all one, length. And as I sit here thinking about that night and them describing that, they were so frantic, and they were so like, not frantic's not a good word, but you could tell that they were like something was off, like they were frazzled. And that was one thing that's kind of interesting about that story is Jeremiah brought up hyenas, and I was like, man, that might have been it. I was really kind of thinking, as after the interview, I was like, man, that's interesting, because the way they described it wasn't like a dog, and it didn't stand up on 2 feet. And I was thinking kind of Dogman at the time, like later on. This is back before I even heard about Dogman. I heard about werewolves, but I didn't know what the term Dogman was. I thought it was like, I don't know, man, half dog or something. I don't know. And as I as I was describing that and remembering those girls saying that, I was like, man, that might have been a hyena. But you just never really know though. But that was a little interesting story. That if you guys go and listen to Bigfoot Society, I had totally forgot about that story until he mentioned hyenas, and I was like, man, that might be very interesting because, like I said, they didn't describe it like a dog. They said it was bigger than a dog, but it didn't look like a dog, and so I was like, interesting. But yeah, that was a lot of fun, and that's one thing that that's the reason why I like doing interviews is because people don't know the things that I talk about, and it's kind of funny with a reaction when I mention certain things. Like the octopus. I know that's been an episode. It's an Oklahoma Myths and Legends, and I had a kinfolk tell me about a time that they saw an octopus running across the one of the roads in Lake Eufaula, and I know Thunderbird and Ten Killer have those legends too. And I thought it was kind of funny that he's coming from the Bigfoot world and he's from Iowa. Oklahoma has all types of kind of crazy things, but yeah, it was a lot of fun. And like I said, I possibly got some other interviews lined up that I'll announce when the time is right. But at this time, I don't know. We'll see what happens. I'm kind of at a spot in my life where I can kind of not make decisions for myself, but I kind of enjoy doing this podcast thing, and it's becoming more fun. And with the help of you guys and the support from people that are listening, especially people who are coming in from other podcasts and they heard me and they're like, man, I really like what this guy's got to say. I appreciate it too. I can't do this. It's like me just talking into a mic and then no one listening. And so it takes two to tango on that. And so I appreciate you guys. But like I said, this episode's not going to be that long. There was some news that came out regarding a kind of a PED lab that got busted back in 2013. And at the time, I remember, this is me now, 2012, 2013, Kobe Bryant's still in the league. He's my all-time favorite player. If you guys have seen when I do a live and I get my video right, you guys will see my Kobe Bryant stuff hanging up and my Lakers stuff. But at the time, Kobe was kind of on the decline, and I had to hold his legacy up and hate on LeBron James. I absolutely cannot stand LeBron James. If people say that they like him, that's fine, but I can't stand him. At the time in 2013, his name was connected with a PED lab that was testing those things. It was testing PEDs, and that was a known place of interest when it came to performance-enhancing drugs. And the news came out about 2 weeks ago that his best friend and his manager had visited and paid for performance-enhancing drugs, such as testosterone. There's another type of drug that it starts with an E. It's not. I was gonna say estrogen, but nah, that's not it. But it's basically what it does is it heals you faster, and it's human growth. It's basically human growth hormone. And it come out that that when this file was declassified from 2013, their names are mentioned in it. Well, if you guys if you're a sports person and you watched the Miami Heat back in 2013, LeBron would look like a dang pufferfish. He was all big and buff, and he was real muscled up. People were, he was a tank basically. And one thing that really caught my eye was in the 2013 finals against the Spurs, when there was a report that went around that basically he had gained 20 pounds or lost 20 pounds. It was like a huge weight fluctuation. And I believe it was it was definitely, something. And that report came out. Well, that was quickly buried, and it was Brian Windhorst who had brought that up. And at the time, everyone was like, oh, that's weird. Maybe it's just sweat. Maybe he had a bunch of water weight. Well, one thing that those drugs that he was taking back in 2013 do is they make you retain water, and it increases your stamina. You're not having to intake much water. You're not dehydrated. You can keep going. And it also prevents lactic acid. And so, he basically was Superman in that instance. Still couldn't shoot a jumper, couldn't go left, but anyway, that's beside the point. And the FBI came out 2 weeks ago and said, "Oh, he didn't have any involvement." Well, back in 2013, there was an assistant in that lab that stated that there was a man named by the initials of LJ who would come in with his manager and purchase these performance-enhancing drugs. Now, the question is did he do that? Now, we go all the way back to the early 2000s with Barry Bonds and Mark McGwire, Sammy Sosa, in that scandal. They had to go in front of courts and depositions and all this stuff and essentially have to prove that they didn't illegally buy that stuff. But I find it very interesting. And, everybody knows LeBron has been able to be Mr., basically Superman his entire career. Never got hurt, never had career-altering injuries until now. Well, now he looks half of the size he did back then, obviously, because you're getting older, but still. It's very interesting. Very interesting conspiracy that LeBron James has basically altered his career. Another kind of interesting sports conspiracy that I think about quite often is Jimmy Butler being the son of Michael Jordan. Okay, back in the day, when Jimmy Butler was a little guy, his mom always told him that his dad was famous and that she was not allowed to say who his dad was. Well, obviously Jimmy Butler is a star in the NBA, and people started kind of looking at Jimmy Butler. Well, Jimmy Butler was born and raised in Chicago, single mom, and Jordan was playing for the Bulls at the time. And Jordan had this one thing, too, that nobody really talks about. Jordan had a lot of problems in his playing days. Michael Jordan. And he really never was the guy that people thought he was. He had a crippling gambling addiction. The next conspiracy I'm going to talk about after this one is regarding his dad. But, Jimmy Butler growing up in Chicago and his mom having a lot of connections to the Chicago Bulls. Like she was a maid for one of the players. Or she did some type of, she did something regarding the Chicago Bulls. I can't exactly remember. But Jimmy looks pretty close to Jordan. If you guys pull up a picture and you guys do the comparison, I swear it looks just like him. Like they look similar. And like I said, Jordan didn't really have he wasn't the squeaky clean guy that everybody thought he was. We'll go back to his gambling here, and this is kind of the next conspiracy, is that his dad was killed because he owed a lot of people in Vegas, all the mobs in Vegas at the time. Now, his dad was driving home, and somehow, how the main story goes is that he had passed out on the side of the road, and he was basically robbed, murdered, and and then left. Well, at the time, if you guys remember, this is 94, 93. Jordan is under some type of probe-ish type thing where they're looking into his personal life. And come to find out that he had all these gambling debts. Well, allegedly, the NBA asked him to step away from the game to let this kind of die down. There was newspaper articles in different local papers. This was not national. This is all local papers that Jordan was allegedly asked to step away because of his gambling problem, and he eventually decided to do that and go play baseball after his dad was murdered. And one thing that's kind of interesting about this conspiracy is that Jordan kept on. He has continued to gamble. And if you guys kind of look at the trajectory of his career, He won 3 and then won another 3. And then he got ownership. And we always, and one of the biggest conspiracies in Hollywood is the sacrifices people take and do to their loved ones. It's very interesting. But Jordan basically stepped away from basketball, let it die down, and then came back a year and a half later. And it's very interesting the way his dad, because they said that his dad was basically brutally murdered and this, and this, but it looked, according to some local papers, and I want to say it was, obviously conspiracy people talk about this all the time, but it looked like a hit job, essentially. Like, it was a warning to Jordan. This also has happened to Bill Cosby. When Bill Cosby was going to try to buy NBC, his son had a flat tire on the side of the road, and he was quote-unquote robbed, but nothing was taken. It was the same similar thing as Jordan and his father. Allegedly, it was a robbery gone wrong. And so it's very interesting, talking about Jordan and kind of his past, because he's got a lot of weird stuff, and he's connected to, such as, like I said, the mob, fixing games. One thing too that was kind of wild was, and I'm talking about a lot of basketball, but this goes into like refereeing. And there's a video of Jordan when he was with the Wizards, and there was this ref who had been in the league for a very long time, basically saying, "Jordan, did I miss that? Did I miss that? I'm sorry, Jordan. Michael, I'm so sorry. I won't miss it again." And Jordan looks at him like, "Yeah, you better not." And this kind of goes into football in the NFL and it being rigged. Now, this is something that's been coming up here in the last couple weeks that I've seen as well. I know Arian Foster came out a couple years ago, or maybe I think about a year ago actually, and talked about how at the beginning of every season he played, there was a script given to him. And they would say, "Hey, this is the script of plays and what's going to happen in this game." And this is every week. They would get a script. And Larry Johnson, who played for the Kansas City Chiefs back in the early 2000s, came out as well and said, "Yeah, I was given a script of every game." He said, "I knew I was going to lead the league in rushing by the end of the year because of, what my script was." And he was given that every year. And then he also mentioned there were certain play calls where, if you study football and you know football, you know for a fact that certain coverages equal a positive gain because of the way there's alignment, things like that, unless the defense disguises it. Well, Larry Johnson realized, hey, there's only 4 in the box or 5 in the box, and I got 6 linemen or 5 linemen plus a tight end. Yeah, I'm probably going to get 10 yards of carry. And he started noticing that. And there would be certain games where, like, it was totally dumb for the opposing team to continue to put 5 in the box. And what I mean by the box, if people aren't sports people, basically within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage and inside the tackles. So the line of scrimmage, the tackles, 5 yards off the ball, 5 yards off the ball. That's the box. And he started noticing that there was less people in the box, and they'd run the ball, and he would score a touchdown or 20-yard gain or whatever. And in practice, they would say, "Hey, this is the play that's going to get you a 20-yard gain. We guarantee it." And he thought it was very strange that the coaches, like, how did the coaches know that they were going to call that, call that game? Another kind of weird thing is when the Patriots were stealing signals. Well, stealing signals is not a new thing. That's why a lot of college teams have to put, their billboards up so when they're making their calls, the other team can't see it. Or the people from the box. It's never the coaches on the sideline. It's always people up in the stands or in the box where they'll try to steal people's signals. Well, the Patriots stole signals and ended up winning the Super Bowl. That's kind of interesting. Everybody talks about Deflategate. I don't know. I'm not really that big of, conspiracy theorist when it comes to Deflategate, where when you deflate balls to make it easier to throw or, easier to hold on to. But those things, and I really honestly think, and this is something that I haven't really spoke about. I think all of our professional sports are rigged because if you think about it, when it comes to the line, so like the Vegas line, this team is favored 14 and a half points over this team. And if you ever watch a game and really, really watch it, you will notice that there's a weird call. Oh, there's a weird pass interference call where it's a spot foul. Next thing you know, that they're going to score, and they end up scoring, and it ends up being 15 points on the over, or it's right at right at a certain amount, which is very interesting. And I think with the adding of like DraftKings and FanDuel and all these different gambling apps where people are over and under, it's very, very strange. That how a lot of these games end up, hitting what it needs to hit for people to make money. And I don't know, Arian Foster mentioned it, but I also know that Bonzi Wells and Rasheed Wallace talked about this too as well when it comes to the money line. Like, they're not making money if you're not hitting the line. And, they use the 2000, early 2000s Trailblazers and Lakers, where that game, like, the Trailblazers were basically up 15 points in the fourth quarter, and the Lakers come back, and it was all types of crazy fouls. And, that's one thing that how referees can kind of control that. And that's one thing that Tim Donaghy, who was a ref who basically was fixing games for the mob, basically came out and said that, this is how, like, I'll put a guy, 15 times to the line, and it'll keep that game close. And a lot of these veteran NBA players always say, for us to win by one, we gotta be up by 15 because they will come back, especially in a game 7, because more games equals more money, which better games equal more money. So I honestly believe all professional sports are rigged. It's very, I think it's very obvious sometimes, especially when, like, this past Super Bowl we had the Kelsey versus the Kelsey. And it's just that was very, storylines and things like that. Another thing that kind of, piqued my interest when it comes to, major professional sports here in America is Tom Brady and Giselle have this weird dynamic. I saw this video of Tom Brady basically essentially talking about how Giselle had her quote-unquote ways, and that she would predict if he would win a Super Bowl. And so there would be days, or there would be times where he was like it was like 2008 or one of those early, or like when I think it was the year they played the Panthers. What might have been 2008. He goes, "Hey, are we going to win the Super Bowl this year?" She goes, "Yeah, you're going to win the Super Bowl, but you got to put in the work. You got to do things. You got to make sure it's right." And he kind of was like, "What?" And then she was like, "No, you need to make sure it's right." And so she ended up winning the Super Bowl. And then every year he would ask her, "We win the Super Bowl?" She goes, "Yes, no." And the year that they beat Atlanta, she goes, "You're going to win the Super Bowl, but it's going to be by miraculous means." And Tom thought that was weird. And then they ended up coming back from 25-3 in some crazy game where, like, no one expected it, that they were going to come back and win. And all Giselle said, "I have my ways. I know how to do things, and I know how to ensure my man, he's successful." And if you notice, now that they're split up, he fell down the wayside, man. He just did not look good. And, he didn't look right. But I think that's a lot of, superstition and things that these players always talk about, how if I have to do these rituals the right way, the same way every time, and hopefully, it works out to where now I can, win a Super Bowl. There's been a lot of players over the years, and this is NBA, MLB. They've said that they would sell their soul, and they have sold their soul to win a championship. I know that during the Boston Red Sox, the year they broke the curse, they say that some people who were on the team said they sold their soul to win this championship for the city. it's just things like that that sports are just very, they're just like, it's like like I said, it's like a soap opera for men. It's like WWE. And I believe I believe the games are rigged. Like how certain players go to certain teams and now the franchise is popping. And basketball is the most easiest to manipulate because there's only 5 players on the field. Football is a little bit harder. But it's just very interesting. There's a whole lot of sports conspiracies. I know, like I said, we may do a part 2. I try to keep this one pretty light. Kind of talk about some things that happened over here the last couple months. If you've heard any other sports conspiracies, I'm going to ask that question. If you're on Spotify, I always ask questions and do polls. Let me know what sports conspiracies that you'd like to hear, and we'll do a part 2. I know that I talked about a little bit of it on another conspiracy episode with cartoons. There's some other conspiracies that I eventually want to talk about, especially when it comes to more serious stuff. I know people wanted to hear 9/11. Eventually, we'll get to that. I kind of don't want to post 9/11 stuff on 9/11. It just feels kind of nasty. It just feels like, just kind of doesn't feel right to me. And I try not to do things that don't feel right. And but like I said, we'll have more conspiracy stuff. The next true crime episode is going to be a local one about a student here in Tahlequah, or not here in Tahlequah, a student out of Tahlequah. And then I'll do some other true crimes. I know that there was one out of, I think it was McAllister, that I wanted to touch on. It was very weird. And then there's one in Eufaula that I want to talk about too, about a family that went missing. So I appreciate everybody. If you're coming from if you're new and you had never heard this podcast before, I like to do things in linear fashions. So like every episode up until this point, unless it's like I always like to do prerequisites. I like to have things in kind of a linear order. And so eventually when we get to like episode 100, we're gonna be really deep diving. I will be doing a dinosaurs episode, which may get some people heated, but it's all right. We'll be fine. We'll just move on, and we'll carry through. But it's just, I don't know. These things are very interesting to talk about, and I always want to make sure that we're hitting different things, and we're not talking about the same things, obviously, like I mentioned before. But you guys can catch me on TikTok and Instagram, Warcry Pod, Twitter, One Man Band 918, Facebook, Yahola Tiger. Send me a message. Let me know you listen to the podcast, and I also want to know what favorite episode you've listened to so far, and also too, you can share stories at realwarcrypod@gmail.com. Send me an email, or you can message them to me. It's really up to your liking. I'm going to try to do some more interviews with people that I find very interesting. I know I mentioned on the last episode with Matt that I want to talk to people that have information, because it helps me develop my information and things that I've been told, and it helps me kind of gather my thoughts, really, because I have so many things that in my mind I'm always like, oh. But I appreciate you guys listening in, and I'll catch you on the next one.